everyone. It's Miss Reed. Just checking in to see how you're doing. And I promised you we would come back and talk a little bit more about the character trait for the month of April, which is problem solving. And I have a story to read to you today. And it's a story that would be appropriate for any age kiddo. And so everyone's welcome to stay and listen to it. It's about the ways that we solve problems and the ways we support each other when someone has a problem. But before we start, let's take a second, like we do when I come to your classrooms, to breathe and relax and get ready to listen. So remember the breathing ball. When it opens up, we take a deep breath, and when it closes, we let it out. Let's do 3 together. Nice, that feels really good. Let's do another. And one more. Excellent. Okay, well, the name of the book that I have is called Calvin Can't Fly. And it's a book about a bird. And his name's Calvin, and his problem, he can't fly. And it says, it's a story of a birdie. And the author's name is Jennifer Byrne. Okay. Calvin is a starling. He was born under the eaves of an old barn with his 3 brothers, 4 sisters, and 67,432 cousins. Starlings have big families. Phew. Right from the beginning, Calvin was different. Right from the day all the little starlings tumbled out of their nests to discover the world. Charlie discovered worms. Adeline discovered grass. Clement discovered dirt. Aubrey discovered water. And Calvin? Well, Calvin discovered a book. While all of Calvin's cousins chased beetles, bugs, and ants, Calvin was learning to read letters, words, and sentences. And at night, his cousins dreamed of eating insects and garbage picking. And Calvin dreamed of adventure stories, legends, and poetry. He even dreamed that someday he'd become a great writer himself. I bet some of you have dreamed of that too. On June 1st, when all the little starlings lined up for flying lessons with their teacher, Mr. Wingstead, Calvin was nowhere to be seen. "Where is that bird?" shouted Mr. Wingstead. Well, actually, Calvin was in the library. As the other little starlings were learning to swoop and hover and fly figure eights, Calvin buried his head in a book. And there his mind soared. So they're flying for real, and he's flying in his head. Calvin read about pirates and cavemen and volcanoes and rainbows. He read about whales and dinosaurs. He learned how the planets circle the sun, what makes the wind blow, and amazing facts like how caterpillars grow up to become butterflies. His books took him to places wings never could, and his heart fluttered with excitement. Oh, I know a lot of you feel this way about reading too. You find a good book and you just can't put it down. Calvin's cousin called him Nerdy Birdie, Geeky Beaky, and Bookworm. And when you're a bird, being called a worm is a really bad thing. Calvin ruffled his feathers and mumbled, How the wounding words of scorn do sting. And then he sadly waddled back to his library, which was his only happy place. And so he spent all summer reading, learning, and absorbing everything his little starling mind could. They weren't being very kind to him, but he likes who he is, so he's just going to keep doing his reading. Good for him. So far, the problem in the story is the starlings not being very kind, but there's going to be a bigger problem that comes along. Until the first leaf turned orange and fell to the ground. Then, the fall winds sent a chill through the old barn. Summer's nests blew to the floorboards. It was time to head south. His cousins warned, "Calvin, you better learn to fly. In a couple of days, we've got to be out of here." And Calvin said, "Ah, yes, migration. I've read about it." Calvin's sister said, "Calvin, can you fly?" Calvin had to admit he couldn't. Ooh, that could be a problem. All the other starlings took off in a giant formation, but Calvin could only stand and watch. A big, lonely tear rolled down his cheek. Do you see him down here? So all of those cousins and sisters and brothers, they're leaving, and he cannot join them. Ooh, that's a problem. Calvin turned and trudged back toward the old barn. He was so upset, he didn't even notice his brothers and sisters and cousins coming back to get him. And all of a sudden, they were tying up Calvin's middle with string and scraps of cloth they had found in the garbage. Now this is problem solving. Look at that. They're trying to figure out how they can include him, knowing that he can't actually fly, but they want to bring him anyways. They're tying him up and stringing him along. They grasped the other ends with their beaks and they flew off. He was somewhat embarrassed, but he felt safe. Wow. There's going to be another problem. For days and days they flew. Calvin recognized the rivers, the mountains, and towns. He had read about them all summer. Excitedly, he pointed them out to his brothers and sisters and cousins, but the other little starlings just flapped their wings and headed south. They didn't really care about what he had to say, and he was glad to be going with them. Soon there came a day when the wind blew especially hard. Trees bent sideways, leaves scattered wildly. Flying became harder and harder. The air had an odd smell to it, the smell of danger. Calvin remembered back to his favorite weather book, and he warned the rest of the family, "A hurricane is coming!" A hurricane! All his brothers and sisters and cousins asked, "What's a hurricane?" Oh, so he learned something in his books that he could tell them about. Do you think that'll be important to them to know what a hurricane is? Possibly. Holy smokes. That's a great picture. Look how well the illustrator did that storm. Calvin explained as quickly as his little beak could. "We need to get out of the path of the violent tropical weather system, which is storming up the coast at a tremendous speed, and it will not diminish until it encounters large stretch of landmass. Everybody, make haste into the cave." Ooh, they had no idea what Calvin was saying, but they had to admit it did sound real. So the flock made a loop-de-left and a dipsy-doodle right, and they dove into the cave, and they did everything Calvin told them to do. Now he's the problem solver, isn't he? To their amazement, a great storm did blow across the land. It thundered over the mountains. It roared through the villages. It smashed It crashed, rumbled, and raged, just as Calvin had predicted. The storm finally ended. The sun came out in the sky, and the starlings came out of their cave. They were safe and sound, all because of Calvin. They celebrated with a great starling party in honor of Calvin. They ate big juicy worms, and yummy crunchy beetles. That's how starlings party. They danced and sang songs about how Calvin had saved their lives. They toasted Calvin with acorn caps filled with fresh, clear mountain water. Calvin was so happy, and it felt so good deep down inside. And he jumped, and he hopped, and he danced, and he flapped his wings. And he flapped his wings. And he flapped his wings. And all the other starlings looked at him in amazement. "Calvin, you can fly!" they exclaimed. And Calvin, the happiest starling in the whole wide world, chirped, "Why, yes, I believe I can." And there he goes, flap, 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 fly. And they all flew south with big, wide smiles on their starling faces. Except, especially Calvin. Especially Calvin. He was the happiest starling of all. And that is how he solved a problem, and how they solved a problem together. The first problem was he was just different, right? He just didn't do what starlings usually did. But then it turns out that what he was really good at, they actually needed. So then he helped them solve the problem about being safe. So think about a way you've solved a problem this week. Remember, that was what I was going to ask you. Have you solved a problem this week with a friend, family member? Think about it. I want you to tell someone in your house what problem you solved and how it worked out for you. And did you use the wheel? Did you walk away from something? Or did you apologize? Did you talk it over with someone when you were mad or frustrated? Maybe you made a deal. Maybe you compromised with someone. There's all kinds of ways to problem solve. And even when you're at home and not coming to school, these are things you can still practice doing. And I bet you do every day. Well, I'm glad you tuned in for my story. I'm going to try and make a video every Monday and every Wednesday just to check in and see how things are going. I'll have new ideas. I think once in a while the tiger shows up, so maybe you'll get to see him today too. And I hope you all have a great day. Remember to stay safe, stay home,